By the end of this video, I'm going to show you how I turned this 3D model into this beautiful image and these beautiful animations. Welcome to another tutorial. This is going to be a D5 render tutorial completely for beginners from scratch. If you have no idea what D5 render is and want to start learning all about it, this is the video for you. I'd made a video similar to this one a few years ago, but D5 render has been updated since then. It has a ton of new features and a ton of new things, so I wanted to create an updated version of this video. Among these new features, we have the ability to accelerate the design and 3D creation process using AI. This is truly exciting, and I'll be incorporating these features into this video. This is going to be a really long video, so there will be timestamps at the bottom of this video and also in the description, so you can jump to the part that interests you the most, or you can just watch it all along with me. And I think that's enough talking. Let's jump right in. So one of the most important things you need to know before downloading D5 render is the system requirements. Does your computer handle it, or do you need to update it? Right here we are in the D5 render website, and if you go to product and go to system requirements, you're going to be able to see the specific requirements that D5 suggests you have. So for example, a Windows 10 operating system or above, an NVIDIA GTX 1060 gigabytes or above, or an AMD Radeon RX 6000 or above. If you want to go more in detail into these system requirements, you can just click right here on detailed info, and here you will see different types of graphics cards or processors that D5 render recommends to run smoothly D5 render. Also, D5 render has a free benchmark tool which you can download, or you can also download D5 render and just test it out on your computer. Does it run? Does it not run? It's all dependent on you. So currently I have an Intel processor, Core i9 12th generation. I also have 32 gigs of memory. And most importantly, for D5 render, we need to see what graphics card we have. And for me, my case is a GeForce RTX 3080 Ti laptop GPU. Now, this is very different from desktop computer CPU. You can test out and see the different benchmarks, but overall, these settings have worked pretty well for me. Let's talk about the pricing of D5 render. The pricing is one of the most interesting things that this software has, specifically because it's free. It has a free version, which you can create your projects, create different renders. You can have different assets. You have access to a very big library inside of D5. But if you want the pro version, it's only $30 a month, which from my perspective is not that expensive if you compare it with other softwares in the same industry. Now, if you want to download D5 render, just go to the download tab and click on the Get the Windows app. So as soon as you download D5 render and open the main window, this is going to be the first window that you're going to see. First, we have a few demo scenes which you can download completely for free and test out D5 render. So if you work with a specific 3D modeling program, you can download the plugin for free and install it on your specific software. So for example, I use the SketchUp LiveSync plugin, but there are also compatibility options for 3D Max, for Revit, for Rhino, ArchiCAD, Cinema 4D, and Blender. So it has a ton of different options depending on your 3D modeling software. Now let's create a new file, and let me show you how to import a 3D model. You're gonna go to File, Import, and I'm gonna select my FBX model and double click on it. And as soon as the model loads, I'm just gonna click on it once and place it inside the interface. Here, I'm just gonna type in 0 for all the coordinates so it can be centered. And this is the model that we're going to be working with. And I want to show you the main interface of D5 render. So as you can see, we have 3 main bars and 1 central viewport. In the left bar, we have 3 options. We can create a new scene, we can add different layers, and we can see our imported models, or we can also see the objects that we have inside of the model and use this to filter that, or use the search bar to filter it. In the top bar, we have our assets window where you can find your models, your materials, your particles, and your HDRIs. And you can also find your own local models. Then we have the D5 Studio option, which we will see more in depth later. We have some shortcuts to add lights, to add specific paths. We can add tools, add particles, add a camera, and add a section. We're going to see all of this throughout the video. And in the right bar, we have 2 main tabs, which are the Environment tab and the Effect tab. For the Environment tab, it controls everything from the sky, also the HDRI that you can place instead of the sky, and also a Weather tab where you can modify the clouds, the fog, the wind, and the precipitation. And for the Effect tab, this is something that you're going to be using towards the end of your images. So you can add specific styles, you can add color grading, post-processing, and even add your own specific LUT. And here in the top bar, we see some options to create an instant render, to create an animation, or to watch the render queue. To navigate inside of the viewport, you can just use the WASD keys to move forward, backwards, to the side. And you can also use the Q and E tools to move either up or down. If you press Shift on your keyboard, it will go faster. If you press Space on your keyboard, it will go much slower. You can modify all these settings right here where it says navigation. You can either be in fly mode, orbit mode, or walk mode. Next, we have the camera settings where you can adjust the exposure, the field of view, the focal length, the camera clipping plane, the depth of field option, and also to see it in 2 perspective mode or just see it in perspective mode. These are some quick toggles where you can see your image from different points of view. And finally, in the display option, you'll have the option to see your model in different modes, in different quality modes. That is maybe going to make your computer a little bit faster or a little bit slower. You can also filter your model by hiding or showing any of these things. Now let's start working with our model. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to save a scene just so I can come back to it and reference it and start improving this scene as the main render. If I'm going to add a new scene, I can just click on this button that says add scene, or I can also update this previous scene by just hitting right here on the update scene button. What you can also do is edit the camera inside of this scene and start moving around, and you can edit the physical camera. So for example, I can drag it down, drag it to the front, and here in the camera options, I can also control the aspect ratio. For example, if I want a 4:3, 16:9, 9:16 aspect ratio, I can control all of this through here, and also I can control the depth of field, camera clipping plane, focal length, etc. As soon as I finish modifying it, I just click on update, and that is it. Now let's start applying materials to our model. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my assets window and click on the material tab. Let me just make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see the whole window. Here I have different categories of materials for example, ceramic, fabric, plastic, wood flooring, etc. And the search bar inside of D5 Render is also really good. So as soon as you start typing in a certain type of material, so for example, let's type in concrete, it's going to give me different options within different categories of the materials that maybe I'm searching for. Or if not, I can also filter my selection by name, by the newest and latest material, or the materials that are free or the materials that are not free. I can also change the icon size and scroll through the different pages. So in this case, I'm going to type in white concrete. So as soon as you have a series of options selected, let's say that I wanted to select this one, I can just click on download, wait a few seconds for it to download, click on it, and just select the surface that I want to apply it to. In this case, I'm going to select the white concrete and place it on the roof and walls of my house. As soon as I apply my material, I'm going to have some material options on the right bar of my screen. So here I can modify the specific maps, for example, the normal map, specular map, roughness map, metallic, ambient occlusion, etc. I can modify the emissive and reflection caustics, and most importantly, I can modify the size of my maps. So for example, if I wanted to make it smaller, bigger, move it, rotate it, or in this case, adjust it to complicated surfaces, I can click on options like triplanar and UV randomizer. Here you guys can see that my texture will be applied in a very interesting way. Now, if you wanted to save this specific material and use it later in your project or use it for other projects, what you can do is go to the top bar right here and click on add to local. As soon as you see this, you can go to your local library, and here you can see that I've added the white concrete as maybe one of my favorites, or I've just downloaded it to make it easier to access later on. Now, one of the biggest features that D5 Render has is the ability to use AI as a companion inside of D5 Render. I think this is the first software at the moment that uses AI inside of their program, which is truly amazing. And we're going to be using AI throughout this whole tutorial, and I'm going to show you the specific parts. Now, for adding specific materials, you can use AI to generate your own custom maps. Let me show you how. Now here I want to apply a wood deck texture to this surface right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my assets window, go to materials, and select a basic material. Inside of this category, you can select your custom material, and I'm going to apply custom materials to my surface. As soon as I have my window option right here, I'm going to go to my base color map option, click inside this color map, and select the texture that I want to use. So as you can see, we have our default texture, but we don't have a normal map, specular map, roughness map, etc. D5 Render automatically tries to simulate what this texture would look like. So for example, if it didn't have that simulation, it would look very flat, kind of like this. And what we can do with the help of AI is go to this button right here, which says AI generated texture maps. And as soon as I have this, I just click once on it, wait for it to load, and D5 Render will automatically generate its own texture maps based on the map that I gave it. As soon as I have my texture maps, I can modify the roughness, I can modify the parameters, also I can modify the texture size, and then add it to my local library. And here I can apply it to all the different surfaces where I'm going to use the same material. Now let's apply a terrain material onto our model. This specific terrain material was downloaded from the Quixel library. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to press I on my keyboard to select the surface that I want to apply the material to. And here we're going to use a very cool tool by D5 Render, which is batch importing our PBR textures. Previously, you had to import them one by one, and this could take some time. But now in D5 Render, you can just click on batch import PBR textures, select all of them at once, and click on open. And in a matter of seconds, you'll have your own terrain material. Here we can perfect it just a little bit. If we zoom away, we can see a very obvious repetition in all of the material, which we don't really want. So what I can do is go over here where it says UV randomizer and turn this option on. The material will be well spread out and well texturized. rasterized. And now I'm going to click on the duplicate option and apply it to this surface as well. And now we have the terrain material. Now for this concrete entrance, I'm going to show you how you can apply materials in a different way. First, I'm going to type I and click on my surface. Then I'm going to open my material window and start dragging in the different maps that I'm going to use. So for example, the albedo map, the normal map, the roughness map, the ambient occlusion map, and that's it. By dragging and dropping my textures, I'm saving a ton of time. Now let's say you wanted to add some water into your model. There are many options that you can choose from. The first option that you can choose from is selecting the surface on your computer, clicking on material template, selecting the water option, and customizing it from there. You can also go to your assets tab, select the water option, and select the one that you like the most. Or what you can also do is select, for example, this type of surface, click on flowing water, and in less than no time you have a river inside of your model. Now that I have the majority of my materials applied, let me show you how to add glass onto your model. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select the surface which the glass is on. I can create my own custom glass by going to material template and selecting transparent, or I can also go to assets, search for the glass category, and you can apply this normal glass. I'm also going to apply it on this surface and also on this surface right here. As soon as you have it applied, we can see some customization options right here on the right part of our screen. The most important part is adjusting the refraction and the thickness of your material. To modify your glass material, you can select the refraction option and also adjust the thickness of your glass. Now that I have all of my materials applied onto my model, let me show you 2 quick tips to make your materials look much more realistic. The first tip is rounding your corners. So select your surface and at the bottom, select on the option round corner. I like to keep this at a radius of 3. This is before rounding the corners and this is after. I'm going to repeat the same process with all of my materials. The next tip is adding decals onto your surfaces. So you have to go to Assets, Model, and select the Decals option. Here you will find different categories of things that you can place onto different surfaces to make them look much more realistic. I'm going to select this wall dirt right here and place it on this wall. I'll adjust the size just a little bit, adjust the placement, and modify the opacity. You don't want to overdo it here, just very subtle opacity is the key. Now let's start adding our vegetation inside of our model. One of the coolest features that D5 Render has is the vegetation library. It has vegetation from all over the world, and the best thing is that you can filter it by species, or you can also filter it by type of vegetation. And to add a tree is very easy. You just have to select the tree, wait for it to download, and then place it on your model. And to add vegetation in a faster way, we can use 3 tools: the brush tool, the scatter tool, and the path tool. With the brush tool, you can select it right here from this top bar, and we're going to select the trees that we want to paint in. After having these trees selected, I'm going to adjust the brush parameters, like the radius, the density, the size, and of course here I'm going to select Align to Terrain. Here you will see a preview of the brush, and if I start painting it in very softly, you can see that I start to get many trees at the same time. But here I want to adjust my parameters just a little bit. I want to increase the radius, decrease the density, click on random size, and start painting it in again. And just like that, you can paint in trees very quickly. But let's use our second tool, which is the path tool. For the path tool, I'm also going to select a group of trees. In this case, I'm going to select some shrubs. And as soon as I have my selection ready, I'm going to create a path around this walkway. Here I can select different nodes from the path, adjust the smoothness, and I can also increase the number of elements inside of my path, change direction, randomize the spacing as well, and randomize the offset. If I want to modify the elements inside of the path, I can also eliminate some of them, like for example this one, and randomize the size as well. Now, if this was a path that you were going to use later in the future in other parts of your model, you can save this path as a preset. Just click on Create Preset, select the path name, like for example, Small Scale Bushes, and click on Save. And the next time you wanted to create another path, select the small scale bushes, create the path, and that's it. You don't have to personalize it all over again. And our third tool for adding vegetation is using the Scatter tool. Here you can just go to your top bar, select Scatter, select the model that you would want to scatter, like for example, this one right here. Adjust the parameters like radius, density, and size, and select the surface, which in this case, it's going to be this one right here. Since it's such a big surface, it's going to take a little bit to load, but as soon as I have it on, you can see that all the trees were scattered in a very fast way. Now, in case you mess up, you don't have to erase the trees one by one. You can just select on one tree, and here you can see some brush records where you can either repeat the same parameter or click on Apply to Eraser to erase this whole action. Now, one of the best ways to add more realism and also save some space in your computer is by using backdrop planes. So if you go to your asset library, go to your models, select on landscapes, and also select backdrop plane. You can select from different kinds of backdrop planes that you can add to the backdrops of your images. In this case, we're going to select the Autumn Trees and Autumn Trees 2 option. As soon as we have we're going to place it on the external edge of our model. Now, one quick tip: if you want to rotate your object before you place it, you can just press R on your keyboard and the object will rotate before you place it. And I'm going to press Ctrl D to duplicate it and put it on the other side. Now I'm going to press Ctrl D to duplicate it once more and just rotate it. Now, as soon as I added my backdrop planes, it seems as if though I've added a ton of trees in the background while I've just repeated the same image over and over again. Okay, so let me show you the model with all of the vegetation and all of the materials applied. Here you can see the backdrop planes that we talked about earlier, also some big scale trees towards the outside of my house. And once we get closer to the house, we can see some small scale vegetation that I've painted in with the brush tool to make it seem very random and organic. To paint in this grass, I've just selected the grass cluster, added it as a brush tool, and started painting it in randomly on my terrain, just like this. To add that extra level of realism, we don't want to paint the grass all over the place because realistically, that's not how it happens. We just want to paint it in certain parts that make it look kind of imperfect and kind of patchy to really sell this image. Now, in case you want to add some vines onto your model, D5 Render has a really interesting tool to add vines adapted to each surface. So let me show you how it works. First, you're going to go to your Assets tab and search for vines. As soon as you see this, you're going to select this icon. I'm going to place it on my wall and I'm going to make sure this leaf is projected onto this wall or into the surface that you want to apply it to. And now I'm going to click on generate. And just like that, we have a vine inside of our model. Here I can adjust the leaf density, the angle, the length, and even the leaf color. Now this is where you may start to get a little bit overwhelmed and your model managing skills are going to come in handy for this. So that's where this object tab is really important. Here you can select this grid and filter your objects by category. So for example, here I just want to see all of my nature objects. I can select all of my nature objects and I can either lock them, place them in a group by pressing Ctrl G, and hide them all at once. This just makes my modeling process so much easier. As soon as I have my group ready, I'm going to name it vegetation. So now you've seen how I've applied materials to my model and also how I've applied vegetation to my model. Now let's take a look at how we can add different furniture assets to make this scene look much more realistic and so much better. Okay, so let's open our asset window and I'm going to go to furniture. The key to adding good furniture is adding a general piece of furniture, like for example, this exterior chair, and then adding some details on it to top it off. Like for example, a towel, a table, some food, something to drink, of course, and of course, some company. Now this is looking really good. Let's also add an outdoor dining set, press Ctrl D and duplicate it and rotate it just a bit. Now let's talk about the interior assets for just a bit. I'm going to go to assets and start adding interior furniture, like my living room, my kitchen, different little assets here and there. So I'm going to add this black leather multi-seat sofa, press R on my keyboard to rotate it, and let's also add some chairs. Of course, we have to add our coffee table. And I always love to add some greenery for my interiors. So one of the more interesting things that we can also add to our interiors is, for example, some dynamic particles. D5 Render has a set of dynamic particles which you can add to give more realism and movement to your renders. So if I wanted to add a fireplace, I would just click on fire right here and place it in the fireplace. Of course, I can adjust the size and this gives just much more realism to my image. Now, some really cool dynamic particles you should definitely add into your next render is for sure some birds, and why not some leaves as well. And just like this, your render is getting prettier and prettier. Now I've imported all of my models from the asset furniture library and I want to show you what models I have mostly on the interior side of my house, just so you can get an idea of what I placed inside. So first we have this long dining table. Then if we go to the living room right here, you can see that I changed the sofa up just a little bit and I also added this furniture in the background right here. Now for this wide open space here in the back, there is a furniture library that is made out of different types of assets that are found inside of the asset library. And towards the back, we can see another dining room, another bar type dining room, and that is basically it. And finally, there are also some rocks right here, just so it gives it a little bit more landscape-ish kind of vibes. Now, this is all the furniture that I've added inside, but just in case you don't have a lot of time to add piece by piece, there's also another tool inside of D5 that you can use to add a feeling of a warm interior. So we're going to go to our assets window and we're going to go to interior parallax. Next, we're going to select the residential category and I'm going to select the residential interior 11, for example. As soon as I select it, I'm going to press R on my keyboard to rotate it and just place it right behind the glass facade. Now, as soon as I have my interior parallax placed, I'm going to go to this GeoIn skylight and just place this at night just so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. And I'm going to select again my residential interior parallax. Here, I can adjust the lighting of the space. So here I can just make it much brighter or much dimmer. I can also adjust the intensity of the light. I can adjust the temperature of the light. So if I want a warmer light or a cooler light. And if we get a little bit closer to the image, like for example, right here, I can adjust the position of the elements. So for example, I can make it look even deeper, like even closer to the window or even farther away. So I think this would look interesting. Or I can just erase all the elements altogether. After I have this, I can duplicate it and place it on the other side. And just like that, we have a really interesting interior without all the hassle of placing all the inside elements. I recommend you use this, of course, if you're not going to create interior renders. But if you are going to create interior renders, you may want to spend some time adding very specific furniture elements to just make your image stand out much more. Okay, so now we have the materials, we have vegetation, and we also have our interior models. Now let's talk about artificial lighting and ways to add light inside of your model. So we had already talked a little bit about dynamic particles, like for example, this fireplace right here, which also gives some light in. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn a surface into an emissive material just so I can simulate the idea of a light fixture on the ceiling of my house. So I'm just going to go inside of my house just like this. And from the interior model, I have a different surface that is supposed to be a strip light that goes around the whole living room. So if I press I on my keyboard and select this surface, I can see that the map is just a normal map that doesn't have any materials applied whatsoever. But what I can do is just go over here where it says emissive and turn the emissive option on. Just like this. And as soon as I turn it on, you guys can see that this acts as a light and it illuminates the whole space. So I'm just going to turn the exposure down just a little bit. So for example, if I turn it off once again, you guys can see how everything just goes dark and starts looking underexposed. But if I turn the emissive option on, it starts to look much nicer. It starts to look very interesting. And here inside of the emissive option, of course, I can control the intensity of the emissiveness, the color of the light. For example, I think this is a very greenish tone for me. So I think I'm going to select a more reddish kind of tones. For example, something like this I think would look much more interesting that goes along with the fire. Or I can also select a specific temperature, which I think is much easier and much more precise. Now if you go outside of the model and we see the interior lights, you can see that just with this light, how much light we can see now in our interiors. Also, another way of adding lights is just going over here to the top where it says add lights, and we can add either a point light, spotlight, strip light, or rectangular light, and we can also add a stage light. So for example, I really like to use rectangular lights. So I'm just going to place this right here and start modifying the length and the width of this. And I'm going to click on show light shape so I can see the whole shape of the light, and I'm going to keep on modifying these dimensions just a little bit here, and this would all be done with a rectangular light. All right, so now that I have all of my interior lights set and also some exterior lights as well, which are just, you know, these point lights that just make everything look a little bit warmer and contrast a little bit more with the outside, I want to go ahead and start adding the environment effects, which I think this is maybe the most fun part for me, which is giving some life and personality to this whole image. So I'm going to walk you through the options of adding some environments, either through the geo and sky effects or also through the HDRI effects. Whichever of these you choose, you can create really good images with. So let's start with the geo and sky. So for the geo and sky, you can think of it as its own built-in skylight system where you can personalize what time of day it is, where the north is coming from, or you can also maybe go into these interior settings and specify the month, the day, longitude, latitude, you know, be very specific about your location. And the newest option inside of D5 Render is using the custom sun. So with the custom sun, I can adjust the sunlight intensity. I can also adjust the altitude as well as the azimuth. And here, if I increase the disk radius and if I increase the light intensity, you guys can see that it's going to be increased right here as well. So I can take this to an extreme, or also maybe say that there's little to no sunlight, kind of like this. And I'm also going to see the effect as well. So for example, if I place my image in a high altitude and variate the azimuth, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the altitude just to make it a little bit lower. And I'm also going to change the azimuth. I'm going to increase the sunlight intensity just a little bit. I'm going to go to my camera option, press F8, and also press on walk mode and just lower the whole height of this. Now, as soon as I have this defined, let's say that this is the sun setting that I want, I can start adding much more things like clouds, fogs, wind, and precipitation. So let's go one by one to see how I would use it in this case. But if I toggle the cloud option, I can control the amount of clouds my image has. So for example, I can make it a very cloudy image. Of course, I would have to adjust the sunlight intensity just so it makes a little bit more sense. I can also adjust the cloud thickness, the cloud density, the cloud height. I can indicate it to cast some shadow on the ground. So when it casts shadows, you guys can see that I no longer have my sun rays and my shadows, and I can go back and change the amount, something more like this, and maybe change the thickness just a little bit. And of course, why not the density? Now, as soon as I have my cloud settings ready, I'm going to go to my fog option. Now here, I don't want to add too much fog, but if I turn the fog option to an extreme like you're seeing right here, and I start adjusting it, you can start seeing how this is going to affect my final image. But again, we don't want to exaggerate this too much because it starts to look fake. So I'm just going to add just a little bit of fog and leave the rest as it is. And finally, for the precipitation effect, if I turn it on and I turn it to an extreme, like for example, let's say I want some snow and I increase the strength, my image is going to totally change. But in this case, let's say I just want some small little puddles. So I'm going to leave the strength at 0. Puddles, I'm just going to leave it 0.28, I think, or maybe a little bit higher, I think, just so it looks like it just finished raining. Now, these are some of the effects we can get with the geo and sky option. So if we go to the HDRI option, you guys can see that my image changes completely except for the weather options. The weather options are going to remain the same. If I go inside of my HDRI, if I click inside of this window, I'm going to be able to select from some default HDRIs that are included inside of D5. And if I click on any of these HDRIs, my mood is going to start to change. So for example, I'm going to turn the fog option for now and the precipitation option for now, just so you guys can see how the HDRI changes the whole image. So I can select a cloudy HDRI, kind of like this. And inside of your HDRI, you can also personalize and customize the lighting settings. So for example, I can increase the skylight, I can increase the amount of light coming from the background image. I can also rotate my HDRI to indicate where the brightest point of my image is coming from. I can adjust the color temperature of my HDRI to make it either cooler or warmer. And if we take a look at this from another point of view, like for example, let's say from right here, we can see that the puddles give this image a lot of life and makes it look much more interesting. So I can adjust the background light. Here you can also import your own custom HDRI, which I also like to use. And I'm going to select this HDRI for now, which I think looks really interesting. Okay, so now we have our HDRI, we have our vegetation, we have our lights, we have our materials, we have our models, we have the majority of things already set. What we need to do is we need to add our special effects to our image, which means color correction, which means exposure, contrast, highlights, all of these things. So let's jump into that right now. So here in the effects tab, AI also starts to play a very important role. But before I show you the very special AI tool that DA5 Render has inside of this newer version, let me show you how I did it before AI. The first thing that I did was adjust this post-processing window, which is just, adjusting the whole exposure of my image, just like this. I can also adjust the highlight local exposure. As you guys can see, I can modify a little bit of the contrast, and maybe I want to make this whole image much colder, or maybe much warmer. This could also look nice. I can change the tint of my image, decrease the bloom. I don't like to use the bloom effects a lot. I don't know why. You can also add your own custom LUT. So for example, if I turn on this LUT, you guys can see that it gives me a sort of filter, very special filter. D5 Render has their own specific LUTs that you guys can try out, or you can just click on customize LUT and load your own different LUTs. So this looks nice. I'm just going to lower the intensity just a little bit. Now I'm going to go to color grading. For color grading, I have different options. I can adjust the global color grading or go specifically into the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So these are all the things that I would do if I did not have an AI option. But now I want to show you the newest tool from D5 Render, which is AI Atmosphere Match. Now this is going to save us all this time, a ton of work, because the LUTs that we applied, the post-processing, everything is going to be applied from a reference image using AI. So let me show you how to use it. First of all, we're going to go over here to the top where it says AI Atmosphere Match, and here I'm going to upload a reference image. Now I have a ton of different renders saved that I've created from past tutorials. Some of you can recognize, for example, this is from our last D5 Render tutorial. And since right now I'm creating a kind of night image, for example, I think this one would look pretty interesting. Again, I'm going to snap the current view and I'm going to click on start generating. I'm going to wait and click on apply now. And as soon as it's done, you guys can see the incredible work that we have here. So the sky is very greenish bluish, like the one we have in our reference image. We also have a very textury kind of vibe from the walls, which we have also in our reference image. And the whole vegetation, the whole surroundings is also very desaturated, very green. And I just love this entirely. So this is something that I want to use. So for example, right now I'm going to create a new scene, and that's going to save it with all of the effects. Now I'm going to maybe move my camera around just a little bit so I can have a different sense of a different scene that I want. So for example, let's start testing out with one more image to see how it can look. So for example, this image right here, which I think maybe I'm going to change the view. Let's go something around this tone and snap the current view and click on start generating. And wow, I mean, honestly, this is amazing. Normally I would have spent a few hours just adjusting the different tones of the image, but now with my reference images, I can export a ton of different renders with the same vibe, with the same kind of filter, if you like. So now let me show you some of the different scenes that I've created using the AI atmosphere match. So these are some of my favorite images, and I think this tool has so much potential because in a matter of really seconds, in a matter of minutes, you can import maybe 5 different reference style images. Like for example, here you guys can see that the whole mood and everything in general is completely different one from the other. So for example, these are some of my favorite images that I've generated with this. Now that we have it ready, let's render our image. So as soon as I have my scene ready, I'm going to go to the image tab and start adjusting the final parameters. So here you can just adjust once more everything that you had the option to adjust from the camera option. So I can adjust the focal length, the horizontal view. I can also select the camera settings right here and adjust the specific camera settings. Like for example, the depth of field option, I can turn it on and set the focus plane right here towards the middle ground, kind of like this, and turn on the blur option. I think this is looking interesting. And for sure, I can modify the aspect ratio, kind of like either if I want a 9:16 image or 16:9, which maybe is kind of the way to go, or maybe a 4:3 image. I think this is more of a classic render. As soon as I have this, I can select the channels that I want. If I want to export with sky mask, ambient occlusion, material ID, reflection. In this case, I'm not going to export with any of them because I'm not going to modify this anymore. I can select this, or I can also select the preset size. In my case, I want to export a 2K image, but you can export up to 16K. And as soon as I have it ready, I'm going to click on render. Now, this is how our final render came out, and I loved it because you can see the out of focus option right here. You can see the textures, you can see the boy in the background just posing for, I don't know, someone else. And I thought it looked really interesting. Here are some other images that are rendered, which I thought also looked really interesting. Like for example, this one right here, this one right here. I think the ambient, the whole vibe was just so cool. But now let's go back to a render, and let's say that I want to animate this scene as well. What I would do is go to the video option right here, and I can create a new clip just by clicking on create clip. And this is going to create like a whole entire scene for me. And inside of this clip, I can include different shots. So for example, I'm going to add this view. It includes the shot. But now let's say I want to add a close-up view, maybe with a different kind of camera setting. Like for example, something that is much more like this. I can also add this current view on top. And finally, let's include a top-down view, something like kind of like this, which maybe also looks super interesting. So as you guys can see, we have 3 different shots. So for example, this first one, then we have the second one, and then we have the third one. So if we just play it out just like this, it's just going to be a few still shots that are just going to be right there. But now if you don't have any idea of what shots you should include, let's go for example to a new scene. If you have no idea what shots you should include, D5 Render also gives you some templates for some shots, which I think are really interesting. So for example, I have my shot here, but you can go to the template, and here you guys can see different types of templates. And say you don't know what pan down is, you can just hover over it and you can see what the pan down would do. Or let's say a 360 pan, a dolly twist out, dolly twist in, a ton of technical names, but you don't even have to know or understand them. You just have to hover over them and see maybe, okay, so I want the slide left. I think this looks interesting. I'm going to apply it. And if I go to this scene and play it out, it starts to slide left. This is super interesting. Now let's add another scene, horizontal push, which is like a zooming in, right? So I'm just gonna click on horizontal push and I'm going to click on play and it starts to zoom in. Wow, this is crazy. And now let's look for another view. Let's just maybe start right here, something like this. I think this looks interesting. And now let's click on slide down. I think would look really interesting, right? So as soon as we click on play, this looks nice, but maybe it's a little bit too fast, or it's just like sliding too fast. So what I can do is just modify the amount of seconds that it slides down. So for example, I don't want it to be in 3 seconds. I want it to be in 5 seconds. So I just type in 5 and this looks perfect, but I can also modify the direction of which it slides. So for example, right now it just slides down, but I could tell it to slide just to the side, just like this, which would work as well. It would work pretty well. And I could also change the perspective mode and change the camera clipping plane. And wow, I think all of this looks amazing. Just like these 3 scenes, they look really interesting. The next thing that I'm going to do is just click on render to render them both, right? So I'm going to select the size. You know, I can modify the size right here, or I can modify the export resolution right here as well. So I'm just going to select a 1080p size. 30 frames per second would look nice for me, and I'm going to click on render. Let's wait and see the results. Okay, so this was probably one of the longest tutorials I've ever made. I've had so much fun exploring D5 render. Probably I could stay here for hours and hours and explore more possibilities with the new AI tools, and also with all the different tools that just make my life much easier when I'm starting to render. I'm enjoying D5 render a lot. I hope you guys enjoy this video as well, but I would love to create more videos on more advanced settings, like creating an advanced animation, creating realistic grass, creating, you know, selecting the right templates for the AI atmosphere match. You know, there are so many things, there are so many advanced, intermediate and advanced things that we could talk about, which I would love to talk about with you guys. So if you guys have any video recommendations, please comment them down below. And also, one of the things that I haven't talked about D5 render, which I think, you know, this video is pretty long, but if you're here for the video, I think, you know, you would also want to be interested in this, is that D5 render has a really interesting community space that is very active. So if you go to D5 render, there will be an option to go to D5 render community, and you can see what people are creating with D5, what problems are they having, you know, what other companies are using D5 render that are creating really amazing results, which I think you would love to check out. So the community feature, or the whole community tab, is really interesting. I want to thank also D5 for sponsoring this video, for letting me explore around with this model. I think it was a very lovely model. I'm going to create a ton of images, renders, posts, and stories, and post them all through my socials. So if you see this on the social, comment on the social, share it. It would just really helps the channel out. There will be a link to download D5 render in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll just leave you with the final images and with all the explorations that I did right here, so you can just enjoy them much more. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.